Welcome back. We thought today, Mark and I were thinking we might give you sort of a double dose of two Neanderthals. So that's almost like
Yep.
getting four Neanderthals. My God, for your YouTube dollar. What kind of bargain?
Quadro Neanderthal.
Yes.
Okay.
Quadra Neanderthal.
Well, so the here's the thing: is aging parents and role reversals.
Yeah. We're both going through that. That's why we thought we'd do a second video, because we got talking about it and we thought, well, maybe this would be cool to do right now.
And so it's a fascinating thing that you can be aware of for years. Like it's going to happen at some point if everybody stays alive and well, but you're never truly prepared for it when it actually gets here.
And neither are the parents, by the way.
Yeah.
So Mark and I are both going through this these days. He's dealing with both of his parents, who I think are in their mid-80s, isn't that right?
Yeah, 85.
And I'm dealing with my mother, who's in her early 90s. So, we're both experiencing this role reversal, which I think is the thing that makes it toughest of all for both the younger generation, which is to say us, hard to imagine, and then the older generation, which is now in their 80s and 90s. So part of what makes it so difficult is that being the sons of parents, of course, our parents saw us growing up and saw us in all of our various stages of incompetence.
Yeah.
Like we were the little kids that peed their pants before the Cub Scout meeting and
Yeah.
stuff like that.
Or got in trouble at school or whatever.
Yeah, right. So they see us, at least partially, even in adulthood, through those lenses. And at the same time, their own abilities and capacities are diminishing. So what they've relied on for the past 50 plus years is degenerating over time. And yet their caretakers, they tend to view in terms of the lenses, the historical lenses of incompetence in childhood. And you were the guy that, got caught getting stoned somewhere and, all of that kind of stuff. So the frustration, I think, this is not an easy thing. There's a lot of frustration and difficulty in taking care of older adults on both their parts, and I think from their point of view, the difficulty is their capacities are diminishing, and at the same time, the kids that they're relying upon, they don't view completely as adults, despite the fact that I'm 58 now and you're about to turn
56.
56, which is far into adulthood.
Yeah.
And yet, there's this sort of perception that you're still that little kid. You're still that little Cub Scout that threw up during the pack meeting when you got your Weeblos award. You threw up, or whatever.
I wasn't a Cub Scout, but I probably should have been, because my wife always teases me about having all these things in the trunk for any emergency situation, blah, blah, blah. That's probably a holdover from my days with the fire department, though.
Yeah. That's like grown-up Cub Scouts.
Yeah. But so there's a caretaking to it. There's also a resignation to it. It's not really the right word, but you have to be resigned to these changes on their part and on my part of that the reality that is no longer the reality that is now.
Yeah.
There has to be allowances. There has to be a great deal of, this is just anecdotal, it's just what I found in my own experience, but there has to be an allowance for the forgetfulness and for the constantly calling. Now, when did you say you were coming over to see us again? Yeah. So and that manifests itself in little ways, like leaving a sticky notepad on their kitchen counter and writing down the next time I'll be there.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I've heard it said that one of the great disenchantments of life is when you discover that your parents are not gods.
Yeah.
Right? Because at a certain age they seem, relatively speaking, so godlike. Like they're first of all, they're physically way larger than us. Second of all, they have all these capacities. They know what they're doing, and as little kids, we don't. but now part of the weird reversal is not only have we learned usually in adolescence that they're human beings and not gods, but not now it's like a step beyond that. Like not only are they not gods, but they're very frail, very forgetful,
Yeah.
very in many ways incompetent human beings. So they're sort of, it's like that As You Like It, that play by William Shakespeare, right? So the ages of man soliloquy, right? So people are during adulthood, it's like second childhood in a way. I think that's Shakespeare's phrase. And that,
Well, and in their mind, they're still maybe 50 or 60 or whatever years old.
right? But they're still the parent, they're still the adult, they're still the superior, and so
Well,
part of the frustration I feel. Let's see if you relate
Yeah.
to this, Mark. Is like I'll tell my mother, like for instance, she lost her driver's license recently, and so I'll tell her like, it's not a good idea for you to go driving around, possibly breaking down without a cell phone. She refuses to carry a cell phone. Like that is not
Yeah.
a good scenario for you. You never know who's going to take advantage of you, who's going to stop. Like maybe it'll be a nice person, or maybe it won't. And
Yeah.
so, and moreover, you're breaking the law all the time. So you're likely to be picked up by the police, and maybe they'll let you go, or maybe they won't.
Yeah.
But she's hearing this as though once again a 5-year-old is telling her
Yeah.
like policemen might like pick up bad parent, like that, and not sort of real. The frustration is like I can be logical till the cows come home, and it doesn't make any difference.
Right.
It doesn't make any difference.
because of the way she takes it up.
Yeah. Right.
And the relationship. Well, for me, it's an example would be all the mail comes to my house at the moment because we're building a new house and we're going to move them in with us and so forth. So in the meantime, they're living in a rented house close to us. So the mail comes to us, including their mail. I take it to them 2 or 3 times a week. And as soon as I walk in the door, if my dad sees I have mail, he becomes just so exasperated because he's afraid it's going to be a bill.
Yeah.
And for a while, I became I could feel myself tensing up when I would get there in anticipation of his reaction to me having mail.
Mm-hmm.
And then it finally occurred to me that my impatience came from his reaction, but his reaction came from the fact that he's gotten so shaky that he no longer feels comfortable writing out checks and even to post it in his checkbook to keep his checkbook balanced.
Yeah, because if he does, then it's a clear indicator
Right.
of the reality of being elderly.
And so we had a conversation a couple of weeks ago, and the resolution is we have agreed that I will help him. I will write out his checks. He will sign them, and then I will keep his checkbook balanced for him.
That's interesting because I had to go through something very similar about a week or two ago with my own mother, who she can write out the checks, but she doesn't write them out for the correct amount. And then she gets into these huge arguments with, in this case, it was a credit card company. She's like, I don't owe you $900. And so I go through her, and she's all upset, and she's getting everyone else upset too. And so I go through her records, and it's like, well, why did you write out just a $100 check for the credit card company when you owed them $600?
Yeah.
And because it's me, the 5-year-old, saying that,
Yeah.
the answer is, I didn't do that.
Yeah.
And I'm like, well, it says right here in your checkbook that you did. Moreover, the bank record says that it did. And then the response is, why are you siding with the bank?
Wow. Yeah.
So it's,
That's a challenge.
but I had to come to a similar thing. It was like, okay, the resolution is going to be around January 20th. I'm going to come here and I'm going to fill out the check, and you're going to sign it.
Well, and there's another huge thing with this too is, in my case, my parents lived in the same corner in the same town on the same street for 68 years. Tell them they've been married. And in my mom's case, that was next door to my grandparents. So she's lived on that same corner for 85 years, her entire life.
Yeah.
So moving them across 3 states at this point in their life has been, I can't even imagine
Yeah.
the kinds of breaking away and the kinds of challenges, in their minds of this kind of change.
Yeah, it's got to be a real uprooting experience, and I bet it's really easy. I know in my case it is. Like my mother, whenever I have to insist on a change, I become the villain, right? So I'm the bad guy. Like I'm the guy, like the bad cop or whatever, And so I think she feels a lot of resentment toward me because I'm the one that has to tell her, like, it's not a good idea for you to drive around illegally.
Yeah.
Especially without your cell phone. And, it's not a good idea for you to write incorrect checks and then complain about the bills. And the other thing that I don't know if your parents are getting this is the scam artists.
Oh, yeah, they get the phone calls. And my dad thinks every one of them is genuine and
So does
sincere
my mom.
and
So
bona
does my
fide.
mom. It's like that, and I think that part of that is that older generation, like that attitude. They don't, we who are younger have developed all this sort of sensitivity to scams and con artists.
And skepticism.
Yeah, exactly. That we don't take things sort of on their face value very easily, especially when there's money at stake. But about five times, I think it is now, my mother has called me completely upset that someone who is pretending to be an IRS agent has, this is a common scam.
They get those.
Right?
I've gotten those.
Yeah, like you're going to be sued and we're coming out to get you. And she gets all like just, unbelievably like decompensating is the word we use in psychology. Like she's losing her faculties basically, about this. And there again, the memory thing, it's like, well, this is the 5th time, but now that we're at the 5th time and, I get a little irritated. Obviously, you probably can tell that just as I'm describing it. Like, once again, this is not how the IRS ever operates.
Well, and the biggest challenge for me is of not responding to my parents, my dad mostly, in the same kind of way that he's taking up these situations, because he gets so frustrated and so annoyed and almost beside himself that when I respond likewise, like, well, Dad, how could you forget that we were going to do this, or where this store is, or whatever it is? Because in my mind, I'm still taking them as being 20 or 30 years ago or whatever, instead of the here and the now. And so when I with intention back myself up just a little bit to give some perspective to the situation and ask myself the question, okay, wait a minute, let's take a look at this in a family setting situation and see what the roles really are. My role has become more of a caretaker, and as a caretaker, I have to take this up differently. I have to take it up with the patience and the old-fashioned word, long-suffering, of what it is. And what it is not what it was, what it used to be when I was younger, and when they were younger.
Adapt.
And when I can get into that place, then I'm much more able to work with them, and they're much more receptive to my help.
Well, that might help me out if I could adopt maybe a little bit more of that attitude.
It's not easy for me.
Well, it's not easy for me either, but I think, my sense is that you're kind of right, like adopting more of that caretaking attitude rather than the usual sort of intergenerational familial attitude, like you're the son and they're the parents, like that starts to not work. because the
Yeah.
roles, the traditional roles, are
Yeah.
not working.
And a caretaker is a better word to describe what it is. And I still give them hugs. I still tell them I love them. They tell me they love me. But the interaction I have with them is more in a caretaking capacity
Yeah.
now,
Yeah.
because it has to be so. And that goes back to a whole other thing that's outside of the scope of the video, but I sort of grew up in an environment, in a small church, rural, country church kind of environment, and they would go to these rest home services on like a quarterly basis to like do a little like for all the people to have some interaction with the outside world, basically, because a lot of those people in the 60s and 70s in those rest homes and nursing homes didn't have anybody to come and see them.
Mm.
And I remember being taken to those services as a little boy, and the smells and the sights and sounds.
Yeah.
And my promise to them, even 30 years ago, that I would try, if I could at all, to keep from having to put them in one of these places.
Yeah.
And I know that they're not. It's changed a lot since then. But my intention still is to keep them with us, to keep that intergenerational thing intact.
Yeah, well, I think the problem with the rest home scenario is, in a way, not so much the physical element of it. It's what makes it so difficult is the loss of the sense of independence,
Yeah.
and consequently the loss of the sense of value as
Yeah.
a human being. That I think part of what makes it so stressful for everyone, but particularly for the people who are getting very old, is that the loss of, first of all, the loss of the sense that they have something to contribute
Yeah.
to the world, right? Even if it's just
Usefulness.
telling their stories
Yeah.
is a way of contributing, and consequently the loss of the sense that they're valuable human beings to the world, like their existence like matters in some kind of important way, rather than just you got your biological continuity. Yeah, so what? Roaches and rats have that.
Well, and my father-in-law told me something valuable not long ago. My wife's father is 86, so he's the oldest of the four parents. And he said, "Do you know what the main thing is that elderly people are afraid of as they get older?" And I'm trying to give my most logical, best informed opinion. And as an answer, I said, your loss of your memories. And he said, no. He said, it's a loss of independence.
Yeah, yeah. That my mother says something very similar to that, which is why the car is such a big issue, right, between her and me.
Yeah.
Because on her side, it's like letting go of, that big sort of, especially in American culture where we are, that big tether line to
Yeah.
a sense of independence is so interwoven with the ability to get around. And because we live in the South, and there's not like subways and taxis and buses and all that, man.
Yeah.
But independence, yeah. And the other side of independence, of course, is dependence. Like feeling like they have to depend, and I think the sort of nightmare scenario there is feeling burdensome in their dependency, like that
Apologetic almost.
yeah,
Yeah.
like sort of like that they can't pull their own weight, so
Yeah.
someone else has to pull their weight
Yeah.
for them, and feeling like not only not being able to contribute and have value, but being in a sense the opposite of that, like being a sort of drag down for the loved ones. I think is a very that's a challenge.
Yeah.
I don't know how I would cope with that. Probably not well. I'm guessing. But see, Mark, I think that's part of what's going on here too. Is that you see when you and I deal with our parents, in a way, we're dealing with a possible image of ourselves
Yeah.
in the future, right? So it's not merely that we're dealing with these long-standing parent figures, but we're also dealing in an indirect way with our own eventual
Mortality
mortality ultimately,
and
right?
functionality.
Yes.
It's it's hard to not be reflective in a situation like this, because it does make you think about, this is, if I stay alive and healthy enough,
Yeah.
I will be,
Yeah, you're going to have
them
similar challenges.
in-
Maybe
in
not
one day.
exactly the same, but at least in the
And,
ballpark.
so that
You'll be the forgetful one, and so will I.
and that by itself, that one thing by itself, helps me get some perspective on this
Yeah.
and change the way in which I interact with them.
Because you're interacting with, in a way, a future version of yourself.
Yeah, and I'm not doing it. I don't mean that I'm doing it in a robotic kind of mechanized way of non-feeling about the circumstances. I mean, I'm not interacting with them anymore as the little boy that they remember.
Yeah.
I'm doing it as a caretaker who has come to a sometimes uneasy compromise with them on how best to get them and myself through the world with them.
Yeah.
And then that involves, it involves compromise, I guess is the best word I could say for it.
Yeah. Compromise. I think, I think there's no easy solution to any of this, to be honest. But I think that the optimal solution, not the perfect, but the optimal solution would be the compromise. I think you sort of hit the nail on the head. But the thing about compromise is that, the conditions are always changing. It's like you and I are getting older. Our parents are also getting older. So the terrain is always shifting, the terrain of compromise, and like how we negotiate that, and not only how we negotiate it, but how we renegotiate it as time passes. Because I think it's a matter of ongoing renegotiation. Like the target is not stationary.
It's a moving target.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
It's like moving around all the time.
Yeah.
Which makes it a challenge.
So I don't have any certain answers, but I just wanted to offer some of these thoughts up, and partly selfishly, because
Oh yeah, me too.
it helps
Yeah.
just to talk about
Right.
and hear myself talking about this, because in the talking of it, I get more perspective
Yeah.
to help.
Yeah, and I think we both hope that this video, maybe hearing us talk about our struggles with our elderly parents, maybe provide some kind of linkage or perhaps implicit support maybe for some of you out there who are grappling with similar things or parallel things somehow.
So thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.
Yes, thanks very much for being here. Take care.